Hi, I just want to give you a brief overview of Photoshop. Now, this is another application in addition to Maya that we need to do our visualization of the facial approximation that we're trying to do here. Now, I've just opened up a blank document here so you can see that I just have the paper in front of me, or the virtual paper, I guess. But let's see what are the most important things that you need to be aware of here. Now, when you open up Photoshop, things might be a little bit different for you, but we can focus just on the necessaries here. And the first is the layers palette. This is where we make multiple layers to draw images on separately. So here you can see my layers palette, and I'll just make my images a little bit bigger here. If you don't see any palette that I'm talking about, or if you can't find it in the mess of palettes that opens up, you can always go into Window and then find the one that you're interested in and click on it. So layers here, the shortcut is F7. So if I click on it, it will disappear. If I click on it again, it will come back. So you're working on a file where you've brought in your two images of the skull, and you have to make some more layers on top of those in order to do your drawings. Now, I suggest that you, in addition to the two drawings, which we don't have here, or the two renders from Maya, which I don't have here, but if you want to make a new layer, you can go into the layers palette. Down here at the bottom, you can see there's this little icon of a page with its corner folded over. That's to create a new layer. So I can click on that, and you can see a new layer is created. When you see something, a layer that has this checkerboard pattern, it means it's empty. There's nothing on it. So if on layer 1 I draw something, just a big X, actually I'll draw something that's a little more visible. And I just create this thing and fill it with black. You can see here that there's a small representation of that, but it's only black in this area. It's still transparent in other areas. So if I create a new layer, and if I just grab it in the layers palette, and you can do this, just move these around. So it takes a couple of tries. If in this one, layer 2 now, I want to draw something else, and again I'll just select an area and fill it with red. You can see that on the layer representation we see the whole rectangle of red, but here the layer above it is blocking it. Oops. So you can see that these transparent areas will let the images below show through. That's why we can see white and part of the red here, even though the black is blocking part of it. This is your toolbar. This is also something you'll need. So window tools. We can use this arrow here as your selection arrow, and we can use that to move things around, and so on. You shouldn't have to do too much of that after initially placing everything. So that's one thing, and we'll also need to use a brush. Let me just delete these layers first. Whoops. If you want to undo in Photoshop, it's Command Z, but if you want to continue to undo, you have to do Command Option Z. Okay, so let me just hit B to go to brush. And so I don't want to draw on this background layer. In your case, it'll be one of those rendered images. So I'm going to create a new layer, and let's say I'll call this front measurements. I'm going to create actually all the layers I need here. Side measurements. I just created two more. I'll call this one front rough, and this one side rough. And I'll create two more. I'll call one front final, not fine up, but final, and the other one side final. This way you can separate everything out and trace your final images onto these layers. So we don't need to see, there's nothing to see right now, but we don't want to inadvertently draw on these final layers. So I'm just going to turn off their visibility by clicking on the little eyeball in this column here. We don't really even need side rough or front rough right now. We can turn those two off. We're just going to start looking at the measurements. Well, we won't here, but when you do yours, you're going to start by doing measurements. We'll get back to the brush in a minute. I just wanted to remind you of how to make measurements here in Photoshop. And we talked about calibrating Photoshop so we have the everything scaled to real world units. And remember, you need your rulers open here in the top and the side. If you don't see those, you can hit Command R, turn those on and off. And if you right click in the rulers, you can see what units they're in. And we're dealing in centimeters. When you look at yours, it may be in inches and you can see the units change. But we want to deal with centimeters right now. And if we want to make guides in our scene, we can just click into the ruler and drag out a guide. You can see this light blue line here. You can drag out another one. If you want to move these around, you can go back to that selection arrow and you can move these guides around. Now these guides aren't really on a layer at all. These are sort of just superimposed over your image. So if we're measuring the corners of the mouth, which we're going Kellyan to Kellyan, and we're finding the position of the terrible drawing. I'm using an unresponsive pen tablet right now, so please forgive this. But if we want to measure those two things, we can find the most lateral extent of the canine here. And we can look at the measurement by looking up here, for example, or we can use the ruler tool, which is hidden here under the eyedropper. So we can just go down and select that, and with our arrow we can drag over. Now you can see that it's hard to keep a straight line going across. If I hold down Shift while I do this, it will create a straight line. And this will give us a length of 2.06, so this is just over 2 centimeters. And so you can record that information. Another thing that's useful to know to use is the navigator. So if I want to zoom in on this scene, I can use the navigator here, which is a small representation of the scene, and as I press the zoom in button, it gives me a little idea of where I am in the shot, in the image, and I can move that around to move around my image. I can zoom back out that way. There are plenty of ways to zoom in and out in Photoshop, but for me this is the most convenient because it's the most visual. If when you're zoomed in, not that much, but when you're zoomed in and you want to move around, if you just hold down the space bar and click and drag, you can move around your image that way. When you release the space bar, you go back to your old tool, which is handy. So I'm just going to get my eraser here and erase these things. So you're going to use guides, pull them out of either ruler, excuse me, to make your measurements. And then you're going to have to record the things that you find. So you're measuring from corner to corner, from canine to canine to get the measurement from the corner to the corner of the mouth. And so let's say you got 2.06, you multiply it by 1.33, you get your measurement. And then here in front measurements, I'm working in red and white. I don't want that. I can just click on this little icon down here to go to black and white. This black is your foreground color, so that's the one that will be used. And you can draw in, press B for brush. You can draw in where that feature will be. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So B stands for brush, and so you will open up your brush and you will probably get the default brush, which I'm not sure what it is because I'm very far away from the defaults at this point, but it'll probably look something like this. It'll be sort of a soft black. Soft means it has a bit of a fuzzy edge. So we want to change a couple of things here to make it work more like a pencil, really. So if we click on this little brushes icon here, we can open up our brush settings. And what we want to change here are just a couple of things. The shape dynamics, size jitter should be set to pen pressure. And one other thing, yes, transfer, opacity jitter should also be set to pen pressure. So that means when you just brush lightly, you'll get a thin light mark. When you push down heavily with the pen, since it's pressure sensitive, you'll get a thicker line. We also don't really want those soft edges, so under brush tip shape, we can turn hardness all the way up to 100. And you can see we get a sharper looking thing. So that's good. Now if you want to change the size of your brush, you can do it up here in the top left corner and just change your size to something smaller. We're working in a pretty low resolution image. Another way to do that is to use the square brackets on your keyboard. The closed square bracket will make your brush bigger. Your open square bracket will make it smaller. Excuse me. So what else do you need to know? Well, there's the eraser, like I showed you. There's another. That's another important feature, of course. I think it should work that if you just turn your pen upside down, the back end should work like an eraser. If the drivers have been installed correctly. Let's check mine. Yeah, so mine's working. The one thing I would encourage you to be constantly aware of is what layer you're working on. So when you're making markings for the front measurements, make sure you're on the front measurements layer. Same with the side measurements layer. Now, one way to avoid accidentally drawing on the wrong layer is to turn off first the visibility of that layer with the little eyeball setting here, which I showed you. But sometimes you need to see a layer underneath to draw from, but you don't want to be able to move it. So let's say this layer is the one I want to keep but not move by accident. I can select the layer and go up here and press the lock button. Now I cannot, Photoshop will not let me draw on that, which is good. So I'd have to go here and do my drawings here. If you want to unlock it, you can simply select that layer again and press the lock button. And another thing you may want to do is make these layers less opaque. So let's say, for example, I want to see this front measurements layer, and I want to lock it eventually, but I also want to make it less obvious in the file. Up here you can see there's an opacity setting. I can just select the layer and then just turn down opacity, and you can see that the image fades away. And then I can lock it, and then I can use it as a guide. So let's say I'm in side measurements. If this was something else, I wanted to use this drawing I did earlier as a guide. Now I can draw that. Oh, I'm making a little pumpkin. You can do that and be sure you're not drawing on that layer but still see it. So what you have to do in Photoshop is not that much. You're using only the very basic tools, but just remember how important layer management is. Make sure you're drawing on the right layer. Make sure you're drawing the right thing when you should be. Making your measurements in the right units, centimeters and millimeters here. And also, please don't forget, save your file as you go along. Save. And Photoshop doesn't make iterative saves like Maya does, so you'll probably want to save versions of it. So every once in a while, do a save as. And if this previously was called, Pumpkin 01, you probably want to save one called Pumpkin 02 and make your own version. So if the file goes corrupt after a little while for some reason, or those things can just happen, you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning. You just have to go back to an earlier version. If you keep naming it the same thing, it will just overwrite the earlier version. Okay, so save versions of your Photoshop files. Eventually, when you're finished your drawing, you're going to turn in your Photoshop file, this one with all the layers, so I can see your work here. But when you're done, you're going to turn off all the layers except for the one you want to save out to bring back into Maya. Let's say it's side final. So we've finished our drawing here. This is terrible. So we finished our drawing and we want to save just this image to take it back into Photoshop. So what we'll do here is turn off the visibility on all the other layers. In this case, I've just got a white background. I can leave that on, or I could turn that off. You can see it'll just be a black line on a checkerboard background, a transparent background. And then we want to do finally a save as. And you'll want to name this side previs or something like that. But don't save it as a PSD, which is a Photoshop document. Go down here to the format and save it as a JPEG. And when you do that, you'll get this, pardon me, this option, and save it at maximum. Just leave everything the same, and you'll be fine. And you'll go back to the Photoshop layout, turn off side final, turn on front final. Oh, my pen tablet is really not responding. And you'll want to do the same thing. Turn off all the other layers, save this one, and go to File, Save As, and make sure you're saving it as a JPEG. Okay, so that's your crash course in Photoshop, setting your brushes, working with layers. It's all you need to know, and then you just have to draw your picture. Okay, thanks.